that if we don't figure out how to reinvent ourselves, if we don't figure out how to keep up with the times, which can only come from idea generation, and idea generation doesn't come from the focused mind alone. It's a combination of this focused mind working with the unfocused mind.
Our next guest on Profunda TV is Dr. Srini Pillay, a Harvard-trained psychiatrist, head of the Neuro Business Group, and co-founder and chief medical officer of the groundbreaking organization Reulay. This amazing work offers machine learning to provide research-backed virtual reality experiences to companies and individuals to help reduce stress and build resilience, agility, and creativity. Reulay is a mindset shift technology to promote healthy longevity and human performance. Dr. Pillay is the author of several books. The latest is Tinker, Dabble, Doodle, Try, Unlock the Power of the Unfocused Mind.
You are watching Profunda TV with host Phyllis Haynes.
Welcome, welcome. I am a student of yours. I am fond of your work. I'd like to know what your primary focus is right now. You have a company called Neuro Business Group, but knowing you, Srini, you are very interested in many things. I have lots of questions to ask you based on what I've read recently, but I'd like to know what's on your mind right now.
Well, I think you're right. I do have lots of things that I'm thinking about. In my leadership development work, I'm working with companies to help them figure out how to not just build resilience, agility, and creativity, which I used to do. I'm still doing that, but with a new lens, which is how do you manage the degree of change that's coming about with AI? And what are the implications for the brain? And what are the implications for the business as a result of what happens to the brain? So I'm actually looking at this in a different way, and I can talk more about that. But I'm also looking at and developing out the field of psychogenic longevity. So for the longest time, Reulay, as you know, is a platform that I've co-founded that helps people make mindset shifts on demand. And so I've identified 9 different mindsets which are actually connected to immunity and inflammation, health span, and longevity. So one of the things I'm doing is sort of through Reulay, we deliver these experiences that have been designed to help people shift these relevant mindsets. But I'm also doing a lot of programming in Palm Beach at Amrit Ocean Resort, where we're doing live programming that combines my insights about how your psychology impacts your body with actual regenerative therapies as well. So I would say those are the two major focus points for me. I just recently went into the studio and started making my pitch deck for my musical, so that's almost ready. And when it is, I want to sort of offer it to people to listen to see if I can get support to develop that. And I've also in the process of finishing up development of a chatbot that it combines nutrition tips with mindset shifts with Dr. Uma Naidu, whose specialty is sort of mood food changes. So I'm doing a lot of things. I think at the basis of my interest remains the same, which is how does psychology in the brain impact well-being and productivity? And I bring those perspectives into businesses and into individuals and their lives as well.
Well, let's go to this core thing that really hit me right between the eyes, which is what is going to be the impact of AI on our brains? Because I'm using it. I like it. I have some fear of it also, of course. But what's going to be the impact in your view?
Well, I think so. To answer that question, I think I would rely partially on the preliminary data and then also on my predictions. The preliminary data is showing us from a study from MIT that if we just interact passively with AI, we're actually going to have a kind of use it or lose it. We're going to be victims of use it or lose it, which means the parts of our brains that have been used to think about things that AI now thinks about are probably going to just degenerate because we're not going to be using them. However, most people, I think, are ready to change how they're using their brains in the presence of AI. So I think AI has the potential to be a huge relief with regard to boring tasks. And so, because of that, we can feed simple instructions into generative AI platforms, get responses maybe for emails or for things that we're writing about. But at the same time, I think we need to be intelligent about it. I think we need to remember that we are the creatives. In my last book, Tinker Dabble Doodle Try, I didn't realize that I was writing a book that would be so relevant to this time. Because what the book describes is that our brains are actually engineered for a sense of possibility. And so if we can understand that having this growth mindset, sense of possibility, that can allow us to ask intelligent questions to get the answers that we want is, I think, where we need to place our attention now. So, in summary, I think that the impact of AI is going to depend largely on how active people are and how they develop their own creative brains. I can tell you that for myself, one direction this is taking me in is I feel like we've underemphasized abstraction in society. Right now, if you go online, you'll get eat this, not that, do this, not that, action, 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 as if concreteness is the only reality when it comes to being human. But the Paris Psychosomatic Institute, Pierre Marté has actually studied this phenomenon and finds that overly concrete people often lack vitality. In fact, they have a name for this, which is essential depression. And essential depression is not about that which is necessary, but essential in medical terms is primary. And so if you have if you have an overly concrete mind where you're not abstract, you're not going into this unfocused mind, you're not fantasizing, you are not only at risk of losing vitality, you are actually at risk of physical illnesses as well. So I think that this is a tremendous opportunity for us to get re-engaged in abstraction, for us to not just continue on this overly concrete path, believing that we have answers, when in fact what we have are a lot of oversimplified answers that we find on the internet. People are very, unique, and so if you ask me, for example, what should I eat, what should I drink, there's no one answer for that. Your genetics, your environment, your biology, your exposures make you a unique person. And so, to the extent that we can start philosophizing so that we can ask questions that will truly impact society in positive ways, I think we have a lot to offer the world because we can leave the boring work to AI and the exciting philosophical and abstract work to ourselves.
Well, in your writings and in your work, you make a case for what you call the unfocused mind. You actually say it has some powers over the focused mind. What did you mean by that?
Well, in the brain, there are two circuits that are often competing. There's the prefrontal cortex and its associated pathways, which is basically the logical brain, that's the focused brain. And then we have another circuit, which is the unfocused circuit, which is the default mode network. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that the focused brain is great for getting stuff done, checking off lists, going from A to B, but much of our deeper intelligence is only activated when we stop focusing. So when we stop focusing, we activate this default mode network that actually allows us to think abstractly, to think complexly, and to actually predict more effectively. So this network is actually called the crystal ball of the human brain because it's wired to be able to bring complex data together to be able to predict the future more effectively. Most people try to predict logically, but the truth is the logical circuit is not wired to do that. So the unfocused circuit offers tremendous advantages. One of the things it offers is it actually helps you preserve your energy because if you go focus, 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 fatigue, by the end of the day, you're out for the count. But if you refuel with this unfocus, you're preserving your energy. In addition to that, the unfocused brain allows you to figure out what's going on around you. Sometimes people are so lost in their own worlds, they lose relationships, they lose jobs. So it's good to actually be aware of what's around you. Also, the unfocused circuit, as I said, allows you to predict the future. It also allows you to be more innovative because you're not just focused on one point, you're bringing two to three to four to five ideas together. And it turns out that the autobiographical self, the part of your own story, comes about because of this unfocused circuit, the default mode network. And what I've been working with corporations with is to help them not just do things differently. We used to talk about VUCA, like volatility and uncertainty and complexity and ambiguity. And people would teach things like, well, do this or meditate or calm down. Well, I think there is now an opportunity to reconstruct the self circuit in the brain. And so, this default mode network, the unfocused circuit, is where we go to reconstruct the self circuit in the brain.
Well, just bringing this back to the layman for just a moment, I can remember a couple of teachers in front of the room with a ruler yelling at a kid in the back of the room, telling them that they have to focus, pay attention. Is that teacher wrong?
No, no, absolutely not. I think when it's time to focus, it's important to focus. I think you and I both know we wouldn't be able to go through our lives if we didn't focus on what we needed to. But there's a reason that Einstein called his theory a musical perception. He said that his theory, he figured it out logically afterwards, but the theory came to him the way in which music can arrive, ideas can arrive. This you have to create. You have to have the circuit. When in your off times, ideas arrive. That's why people say that some of their best ideas are in the shower. Or Sarah Blakely, who founded Spanx. Her mind was just she was getting ready for a party and suddenly thought about it. She wasn't sitting down making a focused business strategy. Or Carrie Banks Mullis, who discovered a way of making synthetic DNA. His lab mates hated him because they were focused, they were scientific, they were going from A to B. And he was driving from Berkeley to Mendocino one day. He was with his girlfriend in his car, suddenly stopped off on the side, scribbled on a cliff face, went to his tiny cabin, and eventually this idea just arrived. So in life, we do need to pursue our goals, but we also need to make space for our goals to arrive. And so I don't think the teacher was wrong. I think the teacher was basically explaining half of the story, which is why anybody who's in learning would tell you that breaks are as important as staying on task. I think in the brain, I call this cognitive rhythm. We need to have a rhythm between focus and unfocus.
Okay, but now back to the workplace because Neuro Business Group does a lot of work in the workplace. How do you get those very focused CEOs and C-level people to understand the value of the unfocused part? I mean, work is constructed like this.
Well, I think there are a lot of people who actually do already understand this. If you look online, you'll find videos of Jeff Bezos talking about the fact that he starts his day with puttering time, and that for him it's important to putter around the house, pick up the newspaper, not necessarily be focused. And then he sets his high intensity meetings early in the morning because that's where he does need to focus and he needs to use the most of his intelligence. But by 5 o'clock, his energy is waning, and so he doesn't leave the most important tasks for later. So there are people who think about this in really pretty profound ways. But I think you're right to imply that a lot of CEOs, if you said you've got to unfocus, they would say, "What do you mean? Like, I've got to go through this strategy, go to this department, do this." Well, a huge percentage of the Fortune 500 companies are expected to exit the Fortune 500 companies. So I don't think we can take it for granted that just because you're a successful company, you're going to keep on being successful. I think you can see from what's happening with AI in companies right now that if we don't figure out how to reinvent ourselves, if we don't figure out how to keep up with the times, which can only come from idea generation, and idea generation doesn't come from the focused mind alone. It's a combination of this focused mind working with the unfocused mind. So the way that I do that is I first describe to people, why we need this unfocused mind. If you do need an abstract thought, if you do need a new idea, if you do need to be better at predicting, you're not going to be able to do this with focusing all day. Then I will show them examples of business leaders who are actually doing this. then I will walk them through exercises where they get to talk to each other and recognize that for them to harness their beautiful whole intelligence, they actually have to give their brains a chance. And then I will ask them to actually do that in lots of different ways. I worked with one organization one day before their strategy meeting, and it changed the entire strategy and it got them to their goals in ways that they had not anticipated. And that's because we did one day of possibility thinking, which is sort of frightening for a company that's trying to figure out how to keep up, right? They were like, well, let's just get the senior leadership team together. Let's look at our strategic agenda and let's figure out whether this is really what we want. And what I said to them was that research has shown that what they were trying to do, which is how do we put out these fires, is not the most helpful way to get to your goals. Richard Boyatzis at Case Western University has actually done extensive research and even brain research to show that the most effective way to get to your goal is to have a well-defined ideal self. So, when we talk about mission and
Say that
vision,
again. Don't gloss over that. The best way to get to your goal is
is
to
to
have
have
a
well
well-defined ideal self.
That's right. So, what for you is ideal? Because the world is so chaotic. If you follow the world, if you made the world your compass, you would be going in all different directions. But if you know where it is you want to go, if you have a clear picture of that ideal self, that becomes your compass. And in the brain, what we see is that when people don't have a clear enough picture of this ideal self, you see this brain conflict. It's not a good use of brain energy because the real self, which is the self that gets up on Monday and looks at the email box and is like, oh my God, how do I get through this? That real self is in conflict with the ideal self. But when the ideal self is well represented, then the brain's not in conflict. It knows I need to get to this revenue goal by this time. I need to do this while paying attention to my family. I need to do this while making sure that I don't give myself a heart attack in the process, that I'm also physically healthy. I also want to make sure that I want my relationships to be in place. So I need to figure out how to do this. Now, a lot of people will say, well, who has the time to do this? And in part, they're right. But there's a piece of research by McKinsey, which I think is pretty interesting, which showed that CEOs who are in a flow state are 5 times more productive than CEOs who are not. Which means if you can if you can be invested in your work so that you are in a state of flow, you can actually do 5 days of work in one. So there are people who are invested in this flow state, which comes about from this cognitive rhythm of focusing and unfocusing, who are able to be more productive. So I think that there are a lot of different ways of doing this. And of course, as I said earlier, there's no one size fits all. I wouldn't just use the same thing with every company that I went into. You'd want to understand the company culture. You'd want to understand how they work, what they're making. I mean, look at Brunello Cucinelli, for example, in Italy, the clothing maker. Brunello Cucinelli, if you read Cucinelli's story, he gets up in the morning, goes to the cafe, has a leisurely breakfast, comes back, does this kind of period of intense work, has lunch in the afternoon. The whole company gets to have a siesta in the afternoon. Then they come back, work together again, and in the evening meets with his friends. He's one of the most successful clothing makers, and that's because not that's because, but I think one thing we could hypothesize is that these ideas that are unusual, that distinguish his brand from other people, are a combination of having very focused work with having this unfocused time as well.
Okay. Well, Srini, the reason you're here is not just because of obviously your big brain and your accomplishments. You're a very interesting person. I want to know, with what you've just told me, what has this knowledge done to Srini Pillay? How has this knowledge altered or expanded who you are?
Well, I think when you start out, you start out wanting to have an extremely comprehensive understanding of your field. And I certainly did that. I lost myself in my books, in my classes, I did as much as I could. But what is paradoxical is that you begin to understand that there is so much more that you do not know than that you know. And what that does is it fuels an ongoing curiosity. And so I feel like what I always tell people I'm very opinionated, but I never think I'm right. And what that does is it really makes me search for deeper and deeper answers. So, on the one hand, I'm very grateful for knowledge as a structure and as a form of meaning. On the other hand, I've also seen two things. One is that there's much more that I do not know than that I know, but also that many of the answers that I seek personally are not really contained in perceptual knowledge, that there is a transcendent way of being in the world that is very compelling to me, and that there is something much larger than myself that I really metaphorically bow to because I can feel that whatever little knowledge I have is connected to what the source is.
Is there anything you'd like to add that I have not asked you about today?
Well, one of the things I often think about is it's awesome to talk about what these theories are, and it's awesome to talk about the brain. What I wonder about is when people listen to you and they're expecting you to interview people. I often think what is the one thing that I can do that can um, potentially help them, and I think there are a couple of ideas that come to mind because I'm thinking out loud with you. There are a couple of ideas. One of them is a quote by Kierkegaard, which is anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. So for those,
Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. Wow, I
yeah.
don't know that one.
So for a lot of people who are feeling anxious and uncertain out there, people who are feeling, oh my God, I don't know what to do. Like, I've just been laid off, or I don't really love my job, or is AI going to take my job, or what do I do in the future, or what do I ask my kids to study? For those people, remember, anxiety is just one side of the coin. The other side is the possibility of freedom. And rather than being dizzy about the freedom and making a premature choice, let's figure out how we can navigate through freedom. Let's figure out how freedom can become a compass for us and we can add degrees of autonomy in our lives. Because autonomy, the ability to be sort of self connected and to make decisions from yourself, is one of the cornerstones of intrinsic motivation. So if you want to feel jazzed, if you want to feel excited about life, I think it's important to know that the more degrees of freedom you build into your life, and the more you learn to navigate through freedom, the less likely you will be to just prematurely attach a ball and chain to yourself because you're afraid of that freedom. And what I would say to people is that I feel like what we have in the world right now, one of my concerns psychologically, is that there's an absence of vitality. And this absence of vitality, I think, is a draining of the life force. Remember that your body is connected to what's going on in your mind. And if you think about mindset, so for example, people who are optimistic have 11 to 15% longer lifespans. People with ADHD have twice the rate of death before the age of 46. People who are uncertain are also compromising their immune system. So if we can figure out how to shift our mindsets, if we can figure out and understand deeply that what's going on in here is related to every other organ in your body, then I think we're taking care of the beautiful gift of being alive. And I really think that there is no perfect way to do this. My telling you about these ideas is simply that. It's telling you about those ideas. I fail as much as I succeed, maybe even more. I think I have great short-term memory loss, so I'm able to drive myself with the things that are successful. But I don't think I could drive myself in that way if I didn't know that I needed that permission to fail. And certainly, if you look at Microsoft, Satya Nadella has said that one of the things he single handedly thinks contributed to their huge financial success was building a culture of growth mindset within the organizations. So, for anyone listening to this, if you're feeling hopeless, if you're feeling not so great, remember there is another possibility that can become your compass. And I would ask you to just dedicate yourself to the possibility of vitality and the possibility of discovery. Because what is beautiful about not knowing is that it gives you an opportunity to discover. And remember that our brains are wired for discovery as well.
Well, I'm so glad I discovered you for myself. Thank you so much, Srini Pillay, Dr. Srini Pillay. I adore your work. I will make sure people know what they can read about you and where to find you. I just really appreciate your time. Thank you for today.
Thank you very much for this. I appreciate it.